floor is yours.
Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
It's a great honor to be here tonight. Thank you very much for inviting me. As you can probably tell by my name, Lars, I'm Scandinavian, so Northern Greek. I've always loved history, and I had two transformative experiences, two road to Damascus moments when it comes to history, and they both have to do with Greek civilization. The first one was in 1982, when I was 6 years old. My parents and my family took a trip to Athens, a summer trip, and I remember going up on the Acropolis and sitting on the steps of the Parthenon and looking around and feeling for the first time the grandeur of the past in a way I never had before. The second moment was in 2001, when I walked into the Hagia Sophia for the first time and saw this. And I realized that so much of what I had been taught about history was wrong. These two great Greek capitals of the world, Athens and Constantinople, really sum up the Greek achievement. But although the first one, 5th century BC Athens, is universally recognized for its contributions, it's the birthplace of democracy, of philosophy, of so much of our literature, of drama, of the science of history and the history of science. The second one, Constantinople, has been lost to us here in the most of the modern world. We're taught that the Roman Empire ended in the year 476, and that this boy, Romulus Augustulus, was the last Roman emperor. Actually, the last Roman emperor was Constantine XI, and he died in 1453. The western half of the empire did indeed fall in 476, but the eastern half lived on, we call it the Byzantine Empire, until 1453. And though it's just as important as 5th century BC Athens in its own way, it's almost never taught in schools. If we look at, this is a map 100 years after the Roman Empire supposedly ceased to exist, we find it looks remarkably similar to the Roman Empire of 476. There was no great divide between the north, the south, the east, the west, North Africa, Italy, Spain, the Middle East. They're all divided today, and the way we teach history is we teach it as fractured. We follow just North Africa, or we follow just Italy, or just Greece. But in reality, it was connected. There was a common culture. We don't usually think about this. When I think of the Middle Ages, I usually think of an isolated, dark place, not a lot happening, not a lot of trade. The Eastern Roman Empire traded with China. They traded with the Middle East. There were Byzantine monks in Ireland before St. Patrick. As late as 680 AD, the Archbishop of Canterbury was a Byzantine, spoke Greek. If you go through the world today, you can still get a hint of that continuity. You can walk from North Africa, from Spain, cross over to North Africa, and all the way around and run into the same comforting things. For example, this is an aqueduct of Segovia. You usually think of aqueducts when you're thinking of the Roman Empire. Cross over into North Africa, and you see this is the aqueduct that supplied Carthage. Go a little further to the eastern Mediterranean. This is an aqueduct in Palestine, and this is the aqueduct, Valens Aqueduct, in Constantinople. Or maybe sports are your thing. When I think of sports in the Roman Empire, I think of the Colosseum. But the Flavian amphitheater was not by any means unique. In fact, there are still amphitheaters all over the world. If you go to Tunisia, you can see this in El Jem. You can go to Libya, the Emperor Septimius Severus This was the city he built, and then this is in Croatia. The Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, had a unique common language. Everywhere in the Roman Empire they spoke Latin. Excuse me, Latin was the official language. But the language that everyone really spoke was Greek. So you have places like Ephesus. If you want something known, you have to write it in Latin because that's the official language, but then you have to write it in Greek so everyone can read it. So here you have the Celsus Library in both Latin on the left and Greek on the right. The religion was Christian, Orthodox. However, it was also pagan. Around the time Constantine converted to Christianity, about 10% of the population was Christian. And in some Byzantine work, we can see very early Byzantine work, we can see the moment where the empire is switching from pagan to Christian. This is from Ravenna, and it's Christ getting baptized in the Jordan. You have John the Baptist, Christ, the Holy Spirit descending as a dove, and the river god of the Jordan, who seems pretty happy about it. Schooling was remarkable in the Byzantine Empire. Just to give you an example, an average of education, it's very hard to put a number on this, but it was probably around 30% literacy. If that doesn't sound particularly impressive, 18th century France was lower than that. In early Byzantine history, many more people could read than the Middle Byzantine history, which is known sort of as the Byzantine Dark Ages. But both genders were educated. You could, if you were a school child, you had to learn. I thought it was rough. We had to read the Iliad. They had to memorize it. They would debate Plato, Aristotle, Aeschylus, Homer, a wealth of classical education that really wasn't available in the West. Constantine had a library he founded in Constantinople. He started it with 100,000 manuscripts. Education could be, everyone could have an education. There were 3 types. Primary, where you just learned to read and write. Secondary, and then the university, which was only really available for the wealthy. If you were going to be somewhere, you might as well be in Constantinople. It was the capital of the empire, and it was also had the most perks. You didn't have to pay any taxes, like that. If you were a wealthy woman, you could just be carried around in your sedan chair. We have Peapod today. You order your groceries. The Byzantine equivalent, I think, was nicer. You'd be carried in your sedan chair by your slaves. They'd bring you to the bath. While you're at the bath, you'd get a massage, and the hairdresser would come and do your hair, and then someone else would come and ask you what groceries you wanted, and then you would tell them, and they would go get it and bring it to your home. A little better than Peapod. As far as education goes in the city, you had women, men, you have there were some very interesting classes. For example, St. Basil of Caesarea. Obviously a saint. I believe his head is preserved in Mount Athos. His classmate was Julian the Apostate, who was the last pagan emperor and tried to reconvert the empire to paganism. So must have been some interesting classes. Also, if you were in Constantinople, you could actually go to the hospital. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but in ancient Greece and Rome, they had places you could go to die if you were terminally ill, like near Ephesus. And if you were a veteran, you could go and die in a place. But they didn't really have the concept of a modern hospital. The Byzantines invented that. Separate wings for diseases, female doctors, wards. It was free. It was subsidized by the state for certain periods of Byzantine history, then they ran out of money. And the understanding of medicine was better in the East than it was in the West. When the Crusaders show up, they say, they start making fun of the Byzantines because they take more than one bath a month.